This is June 23rd, 2008, at 3:45 in the afternoon. June and Ken Hunter are interviewing John Zongrone in the New Scotland Historical Association near Albany, New York. John Zongrone served in the United States Army from September 7, 1954 to September 7, 1956. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
My full name is John R. Zongrone. I was born in New York City on May the 20th, 1933.
And what did you do before you went into the service?
Before I went to the service, I was in college. I went to New York State College for Teachers in Albany, which is now SUNY Albany, for 4 years, and was deferred with passing grades, etc., until it was time for me to graduate, at which time I was drafted into the service. I had received my draft papers prior to that, probably 2 years before I graduated, and then as long as I maintained my grades, then I was able to be deferred until finally graduated in June of 1954.
So you were drafted.
Yes.
Then where did you report?
I reported to, my hometown was in Chester, New York. We reported there, we left from Chester, New York, from the draft board to New York City, where I reported.
And then from New York City, did you go on for basic training at that time, or?
Yes, I went for basic training, which was infantry basic at Fort Dix in New Jersey.
And tell us a little bit about what your living quarters were like and anything you remember that you did.
Okay, living quarters were basically World War II barracks. They were all open with double bunks right down the road. With the mess hall was in another building, so we had to report to for meals. We did our training out in the field in Fort Dix, and what happened that year happened to be a very rainy year, so we had a few times on the field where we were having our breakfast eggs full of water with the rain. Did the usual, I guess, basic training, the marching and the rifle range and the tear gas training and the grenade training and bayonets, everything that I guess was required training for that 8-week period.
Were you ever assigned KP duties?
Actually, I got a little lucky with that. I actually did have KP duties in Fort Dix, but seeing as my name began with a Z, I didn't really get picked early. I normally was kind of at the end of the list. They never ever reversed it to Z first. And then to go on, actually, I don't know if we want to go into the next 8 weeks or not at this point, but that's pretty much wrap up at Fort Dix.
Okay, now we'll go on to the next 8 weeks.
Okay, then I was assigned to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where we did 105 howitzer artillery training. I was assigned to an artillery battery at Fort Chaffee, and again with the KP was I was sort of at the bottom of the list and just about made it out. I probably signed KP maybe once when I was at Fort Chaffee, but we did have guard duty. We had a couple of times where we had to do guard duty at night, where we had to guard various buildings on the post. 3 on, 2 on, 4 off, 2 on.
What hours of the day did you have to work for the new education you were getting? I mean, what time did you get up, and did you ever have time
probably
off?
6 o'clock. Well, we did the training. The artillery training was we learned how to drive the 2-ton trucks which pulled 105 howitzers, and that was a whole training session there, like driving any big truck with basically a trailer behind it.
Did you have a driver's license before you went
yes,
in the service?
I had my own
So
private
that helped
driver's
you.
license
Mhm.
with that. And also we would go out on the range and with the artillery, the 105 howitzers, some of the folks in our division were forward observers. They would go out into the field and they would call back, artillery coordinates, shoot around here, like usually over, then shoot around short, and then they would basically keep zero in, and then when they finally felt that they were zero in on the target, they would do the fire for effect, and that's when all the howitzers would shoot at the same time and just saturate the area with artillery.
Did you have ear protection back then?
Yes, we did. We had plugs that you wear, and that was pretty interesting. When that thing went off, you didn't hear a lot for a while because it was pretty loud because you're right there. We loaded the shell into the artillery, and then the sergeant or whoever would be calling the command, and we were all set to go. It was aimed correctly, and then they would pull a lanyard and fire the rounds.
How many men were assigned to an artillery piece?
I'm thinking, if I recall, it was like 4 or 5 right there, and then you had your other people who were bringing artillery shells up behind you, and then somebody would be loading the artillery shell into the howitzer, and then close it.
I would assume that these shells were fairly heavy.
They were fairly heavy, yes. Yeah, I don't recall how heavy they were, but yeah, they were pretty heavy.
And what about safety precautions out there? Did they monitor you carefully?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they were. We always had our training people who were with us at that point to make sure that we were obviously doing the right thing, being fairly new at this. And they were always concerned about our forward observers, because our forward observers were out there. It was usually a 2 or 3 man group, that usually a lieutenant and probably had a sergeant or another non-commissioned person with him, and they would do zeroing in. They were trained with the particular instruments to judge distances and so on. So it was obviously want to make sure you weren't shooting at your own people.
Now, did you have firing exercises daytime and nighttime?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we did have both. Yeah.
Was there any difference in the nighttime firing? Any special safety precautions because it was nighttime?
Honestly, I don't recall specifically whether we did anything differently. I just don't remember.
Mm-hmm. I imagine, did you have hotter weather then, I imagine? Or wasn't it too bad?
Actually, it was kind of cool. We were there, I went in September, probably October, November. We went to Fort Chaffee, so it was winter time, and actually getting up in the morning there was pretty cold. I thought it would be warmer in Arkansas, but it wasn't. It was pretty cold. A couple of the things we did, I can recall, probably Fort Dix or at Chaffee, we may have done it, was when you talk about the nighttime, we did some of the nighttime training, some of the field work, and we did some of the maneuver, or some of the exercises, like crawling under barbed wire, where they were firing machine guns over your head with the tracer bullets. So that was kind of interesting to see those tracer bullets going over your head, and just be sure you don't stand up, So they
You
were
didn't
very
get your
careful about
clothes
that.
caught in the barbed wire?
No, we went under, it was difficult, but you had to be careful not getting yourself caught.
Now,
That's something I remembered now.
Did you have most of your meals in barracks atmosphere, or were there occasions when you were fed from field kitchens?
Most of the time we would be in the barracks, usually for breakfast and dinner. But then at lunch, though, if we were out, we would have field. We would be served from the field kitchen. Most of the day was spent either in classes or out on the firing range, or marching, or all the different activities again.
Did you have time off from this, like?
Well, we did, but very little. Like Chaffee was near Fort Smith, Arkansas, which was not a very big place. And as I recall, those 8 weeks, I very rarely went anywhere. We pretty much stayed on the base for the weekends. There was really no place to go if we wanted to go to movies or, game room, that type of thing was on the base. But at Fort Dix, a few times my fiance came down to visit, for a day. It's a long drive from Albany to New Jersey, and we didn't have a lot of time. We didn't get a lot of time off, so and we didn't have any leave when we were at during the basic training.
And then, so when you were finished there, then what did you do and where did you go?
Well, we finished there. We flew back to New Jersey to disembark. We received our orders at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and we were basically lined up, and your name was called off, and some of the folks were assigned to Korea, some were assigned to Germany, depending on whatever their need was and whatever your particular specialty was as far as your training was concerned. But I was assigned to Germany, flew back to
McGuire?
No, well, I flew into McGuire, but it wasn't Fort Dix, but it was the other fort there that is where this temporary training, temporary assignment where you were assigned before you would disembark to the ship, which we, when we went over to Germany by ship, which took about 7 or 8 days across the North Atlantic and landed in Bremerhaven. But I did do KP at when we were waiting. All we did was wait to be assigned, and we didn't have a lot. So basically, the troops were coming in and out, every day. There was a group coming in, and I think like we arrived, we got in at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and they fed us chicken with water gravy. There's water and black pepper in it. Now, I can still remember that part. But and then we shipped out on one of the basically was a leftover was the USNS Bruckner, which was basically a leftover World War II troop ship that we were using, and we were down in the hold with the cots lined up 4 deep, and basically it was the old joke, you all turned over at the same time because there wasn't a lot of room between the each of the layers of the cots. So that was interesting, and being really one of my first times on the ocean, a lot of the men were really sick, and it took 2 or 3 days until they got their sea legs, and then couldn't eat anything. But after that, you could eat everything. I mean, you just could not get full. Once you were over that hump, it was just like you couldn't.
And you didn't get seasick?
Not too bad, but I didn't feel too well. But that ship was where you go outside to stand, and it just went like this end of the railing on the deck was underwater, and then this end of the railing on the deck was underwater, and then it was going up and down, forward to back. But anyway, we got to Bremerhaven, and we were got our assignments, put us on trains. And interesting thing about the train situation in Germany at that time is apparently Hitler built all his railroads to go east to west and not many north to south. So that was, I guess, because he was going to invade Russia, and then he was going to invade, going the other way to France. So basically the train would go and then stop, and go the other way and stop, and go the other way and stop. So basically he went sort of crisscross down Germany, because Bremerhaven being in the north and Munich being toward the south. That's how we finally got to Munich. It took probably a day or something to make that trip. But then when we got there, we were assigned to our barracks in Munich, which were converted German barracks for the German army, and we're assigned there. And when I got there, I was asked that famous question, do you know how to type? And I said yes, because I had taken typing in high school, And they said, okay, well, you're going to be the battery clerk. So I really had no specific training in there prior to that time. So I learned on the job and worked for the captain, who was our CEO for our battery. And so he and I worked, and the first sergeant worked pretty close together.
Can you explain what a battery is?
Well, battery is the same as a company, you know, that you would think for the infantry, except that it's the artillery, and battery being, of course, the artillery pieces, the 105s and 155s and so on. So it's just the same thing. We had batteries where A, B, C. We were C battery, ABC battery, ABCD battery. Then we were part of the division, and the division part of the, part of the
Company.
battalion, battalion, and then the
Division.
All the different
right.
divisions.
Yeah. So that's what the battery is. It's comparable to what would be an infantry company, and in the battery there were squads, and those squads were assigned a howitzer in our case, and they were in charge of that. They would do the maintenance on the artillery pieces during the week. That was their job. We had a motor pool which would take care of our jeeps and our 2-ton trucks, which were pulling the artillery. We had our mechanics who were there. That was their assignment. They would take care of those pieces, and then the actual artillery fellows who maintained the weapons themselves, and would go out on training exercises and so on. But about once a month we would have an alert. It would just normally be first thing early in the morning. Their alarm would sound off. Everybody would take off their spots, and my job, since I was in the office as the battery clerk, would be to load all of our daily. We had to do our morning report every morning as to who was reporting in for sick, and who was not available, and who was on leave, and who was wherever they were, and who was at KP, and who was doing various kinds of duties, guard duties and so on. And so that I had to pack all of my things in my little field typewriter, and we had a Jeep which was closed in, and actually the office was in the back of this closed-in Jeep. So that was where I worked out of when we went to the field, and we would all, get loaded up, get in a convoy, and go to wherever we were supposed to be assigned to for the alert. And normally we would go up to, which was the border between East and West Germany, and supposedly what we were told, the Russians would do the same thing on the other side, and we would both just kind of go up to the border and stop. And the whole question was, one of these times, are we not going to stop? And that's what we did. And periodically, occasionally, I should say not periodically, probably occasionally, was there would be like a Jeep patrol which would be patrolling that border, and they would just turn up missing, and nobody would know what happened to them. So the idea was, they were may have been taken by the Russians for intelligence purposes or that type of thing, and maybe we were doing the same thing. I don't know,
So then these people would just disappear and never heard from them
apparently
again?
That was at least the word that we got. And that was the Cold War, and that was the type of thing that was going on at that point.
And how far was it from where you were to that border?
We would get there like in the morning, so I would have to say maybe 20 or 30 miles or so that we would go there. And it was kind of interesting, going through the German countryside and going through all the farmland and all that. And actually, people were pretty nice to us. We would always have, stop for rest breaks and so on, and food and whatever. And one time, I remember we stopped, and this German lady came out and this farmhouse, and she was making kuchen, I guess, and I don't know how much kuchen she had, but she fed a lot of course, all you had to tell those fellows was there's food someplace, and they accumulate in a hurry. But she did. I still remember that, and it was just very nice of her to do that. Actually, I don't know how much she was baking, but she seemed to feed a lot of guys got cooking. But, so that was kind of interesting. But it was interesting because when you're out in the countryside, you got to get to see some of the locals and go to a lot of the small towns and so on. That was fun. But of course, during the winter, we were there. It was a pretty cold winter. That was not too much fun, though. In fact, I mentioned in my write-up here that as far as the equipment goes, I mean, we did have some problems when it got really cold with the weapons and the vehicles. Just like be here, really freezing up the Jeeps and so on. So those mechanics had a lot of work to do to keep the fleet rolling. And you get breakdowns along the road, and they would be there. And you always have the last truck in the convoy was the repair where the mechanics were, so they would come along and try to help whoever was broken down along the way and get them back to the base. But of course, off time we did have time, on weekends and so on, to be off on the base. There was movies, there was a PX, there were game rooms and a lot of that type of thing to do, and didn't have a lot of television or any of that, but no phones, and it's interesting now, I never called home for 14 months. I mean, we didn't have a phone, and there was really nowhere to call, but the time we had to get a call at home, that was not a good thing. Usually it was the Red Cross calling about a problem of some kind. So, but we did get to spend time in Munich and on weekends and go to the Hofbrauhaus, and that was great, to go to the festivals and enjoy some of that thing. And the funny thing is, I would run into some of my friends in college because we all were out at the same time, and we're all taken into the service at the same time. And I had a few college classmates in my battery, believe it or not, and then also some other college friends we would see at different places. We see them at the Hofbrauhaus or some of the restaurants or some of the activities. There was they also had the Oktoberfest, and we're in fall there, and that was a huge thing going on with tremendous sized tents and bands, 3 or 4 bands under one tent. The tents were so big, there would be 4 bands playing and serving food and drinks and so on. So we got to at least get involved with some of the local
activities.
color and activities and so on. And also I did take German class for a while, just to try to learn some of the things, to say hi and thank you, please, and so on. So, but and that was. Any more questions about that phase of the thing? After about a year and a half, as I was mentioning to Ken earlier, we were notified that our division was going to be replaced by the 82nd Infantry Division. They were taking our place, and so they broke our division up. Like there was a headquarters which was in Augsburg, and our battalion was in Munich, and there were other battalions in a couple other places, and so I got transferred to Augsburg and was assigned to the division classification and assignment unit, because that was now my MOS because of my work as being the battery clerk and so on. So I was assigned there for about a month or so until that unit, because my unit was leaving earlier, and I still had more time to spend over there. You had to spend a certain amount of time in Germany before you were eligible to come back home. So I had to spend another month or so in Augsburg, and then I traveled back from Augsburg home, got married, and had a 30-day leave, drove out with my wife to California, and we were assigned to Fort Ord, California, and got an apartment out there, and then spent the rest of my time there, which was about 4 or 5 months, in division classification and assignment in California, and then eventually got discharged and came back, to this area. The nice part about being in classification assignment out there is we always got nice cakes from the from the mess hall, because the guys there thought, we could have had something to do on where they would be sent, Some of them wanted to be sent to
Yeah.
here, some of them wanted to be sent there. But in actuality, we didn't. It all depended on where they needed somebody and what their MOS was and what their time was there. And then
Now, for those that don't know, MOS is the Military Occupational Skill.
Skill. Thank you. So, and so they were pretty much assigned, and we would receive the reports, and, people in wherever they were, Korea, were, ended their service, and they were coming back, so we needed to replace them with people who were being trained or stationed somewhere else.
So you pretty much were able to have like a desk job most of the time, or did you have to go out on any kind of patrols along the border?
Just,
or something?
Well, we went out, with the alerts. We went out with the whole unit,
Yeah.
went out together. So we were all out in the field. Everybody was there. And just except for, some of the updated training sessions, which I had to do also. But my primary job was to be working in the office with the commanding officer and the first sergeant.
Mhm.
Pretty much worked at their, direction, whatever they told us to do, and they were basically organizing everything.
Mhm.
When you had the opportunity to visit Munich, did you also have an opportunity to view the remains of the prison camp, the German concentration camp there?
We went on I took a trip to Dachau, and that was the one that was closest to the base, and that was actually a trip that we went on from our base to Dachau, which was like a day trip and so on. That was the closest one that we went to. Yeah, I did, and we saw the ovens, and we saw the pits, and where even though at that point everything was gone, it was still a pretty dramatic place. And as a matter of fact, which made it even more meaningful, was when I was at SUNY Albany, my fraternity was involved in a situation where we had to leave. I was happened to be president at the time. We had to leave our national chapter because of discriminatory clauses, and that was in the papers, and it was in articles in the New York Times, and it was a big thing at the time because a lot of the state colleges were going through the same discriminatory situation for fraternities. So we actually left that and formed a local fraternity, and I was the first president of the local fraternity. But in our fraternity, we actually had a gentleman whose name was Kurt Rosenbaum, who was actually over in Germany and was in the concentration camp, and his whole family was killed, and he managed to get away somehow, and he actually had a tattoo. He had his tattoo number on his arm that, you could see. So, yeah, and on that basis, the trip to the Dachau was, certainly more meaningful kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
But we did actually went to we did some other traveling while I was in Germany. Some trips to Titler's Eagle Nest. We went up to that, and in that area, that ski area. Although I didn't do any skiing, but we did go there. And we also, on one leave I had, a couple of my buddies and I went down to Italy. We did a trip to Italy, and did some sightseeing in Italy, Rome, and Naples and Capri and that type of thing. So I did get it. That was a week or so that we had leave and went there, and did some other trips around. We went to see that lake that's in Germany, and I can't think of it, Cider Z, I think it was, but anyway, we did a trip there that you did a boat trip, and you managed to go in to the area that was the only way you could get in there was by boat. You know, there were some churches that were way back in there that, you know, were really in the mountains pretty much. And so I did get to answer your question. You know, we did get to do some. We did a lot of sightseeing in Munich, all the different parks and statues, and, you know, as much as we could, and a lot of pictures, you know.
Have you ever been able to go back to visit since you were there?
We did, yeah. My wife and I did a couple of tours. We went home. I had a daughter and her husband were stationed in Germany. He was a captain in the Army and a West Point graduate. And when he was stationed there, we did get over to did a tour, and we ended up spending a week with them at their house. And while they went to work, she had a job, and he was, you know, in the service. That we managed to do some local traveling.
Had it changed much since you have been there?
Yeah, it had actually, yes, it had certainly more built. I mean, although even when I was there, you know, from World War II, destruction, a lot of it, I mean, they seemed to work very fast. There was a lot that had been rebuilt, but there was still a lot of buildings that, you know, were just places that were just rubble. And but when I went back later, you know, a lot more was built. And of course, I don't know if you've been to Germany or not, but it's at that time, or when we were, they very, very clean. They maintain it. You know, every morning people are out there sweeping the sidewalks and so on, which is always kind of amazing that they do keep it very clean.
What about mail call while you were stationed in Germany? I bet that was a pretty popular time.
Yes, it was. Yeah, we had the, you know, the mail all went to the APO, you know, and we had the letters that were the approved letter mailing that, you know, we were getting. Yeah, it was a pretty popular time. As I said, you know, we didn't make phone calls, and the only contact with home was the mail, and so everybody really did look forward to getting the mail from home. Sometimes, unfortunately, it wasn't good news in a lot of cases, but, you know.
What were there occasions when you had entertainment from traveling USO shows? Probably.
Maybe not as much.
No, I didn't. I don't recall. No, we usually, if, like, as I mentioned, entertainment, we would go into Munich. And, you know, Munich was a very lively city, and there was a couple of areas. There was one area that was like the arts area where they had a lot of restaurants, and they had a lot of galleries and different kinds of things. So that was kind of an interesting area to go to. And but normally, you know, we went to entertainment into the cities. I mentioned we did, while I was there, we did get to go to Paris for, you know, one weekend also. So, you know, did entertainment there.
For the most part, how were the German people? Were they very receptive?
I would say yes, but I think I would say they were tolerating us. You know, I don't know as they were happy we were there that much, you know, after the war was over and so on. Of course, at that point, we pretty much were there because Germany did not have a real strong army. I don't think they had been, you know, had rebuilt the German army at that point, because I guess that was part of the deal. You know, they were not going to have an army after that for a while anyway. But you know, there was always a threat of the Russians, and so we were pretty much there to provide that barrier from the Russians to help keep Germany the way it was. But I think it could be both. I don't know whether it was their experience, but usually, like if we go to a Hofbräu house or someplace, folks were very friendly, and they were, you know, happy to give you directions. You know, obviously they would recognize right away you were an American serviceman, even if you didn't have your uniform on. But so they were pretty helpful. The language barrier and that type of thing. Occasionally, you might get a little bit of a feeling that, I don't think anybody was happy about somebody occupying their country, where it is. But so I think, but I would say probably on balance, and I think we're probably doing a lot for their economy, with the troops there and spending their money as fast as they could. So I think that part was good for them and helped to rebuild their country. And I think the contrast between the West Germany and East Germany was so dramatic. East Germany was in really, really dire straits there for a long time. And so I think, they were happy that West Germany was more prosperous.
Was it would it be easy to get from West to East Germany, or was it
was pretty
very
tough.
heavily guarded?
Yes, yeah, and you had to go through the border checkpoints, and I'm not sure I knew anybody who went. I mean, none of our service people went over, and I certainly didn't try,
They were afraid they wouldn't come back.
I guess that could have been part of it, yeah.
And were people escaping at that time from east into west?
Yeah, there were people who were escaping, sometimes not successfully. They had it pretty tightly controlled. It was not easy to get across. And I don't know what the requirements were for them to leave. I think they were pretty stringent.
Mm-hmm.
Not many people were allowed to leave unless, I guess, your family and your children, everybody else was there. So you better come back. I guess that was the story there.
Did you ever have occasion to meet with Russian soldiers?
No, not there. Not at that point. Oh, I met Russian soldiers late more recently when we traveled to Russia, but going through, but not there. No.
Okay, now, when you were released, how have you ever been in touch with any of the people you met in the service, or?
Actually, one of my friends was in my wedding party as one of the ushers. Did have some connection with a couple of gentlemen, one over in Boston and one in New York. But that was probably pretty much it. By the time we got to California, our division was pretty well thinned out because they were replacing people as to when they were getting released.
Mm-hmm.
So the earlier people came back, got released. Some of them came right home and got released. The ones who still had time left were sent to California to continue their time until their time was released. So actually, by the time we got there, you were talking about guard duty. Some people were pulling guard duty like almost every day because we were down to very few people. And the only reason I didn't do it is because I was exempt because of my job. My commander there said, I can't have you being on guard duty all day. I need you here, I need you to do this, our job. So our unit was pretty much exempt from any other duties that would take us away, from our jobs, because we had a day job all day. We were there. But as a result, when we finally left, there were very few people who we still had contact with who were there.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we were there, we had an apartment off the base, and so they would come once a week or so. My wife would cook dinner for them, and so on. So we were, pretty friendly. And then, but after you leave, everybody kind of goes their own way, and so you in touch for a while, but after a while, that stops for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
What was the separation process like from the Army to get back into civilian life?
Oh, you mean the actual physical separation?
What did you have to go through?
Just you got all your discharge papers. You had an interview, like an exit interview. You were if you wanted some letters of recommendation for jobs and so on. You know, they were given that. I was offered the opportunity to stay in the Army, re-enlist, go to officer training school, officer candidate school, which I turned down because I had just gotten married and I had been trained as a teacher, although when I got back it was a little bit too late to start the school year, so I was not able to get a job at that point. My high school principal wrote and offered me a job at his school in Livingston Manor, New York. However, by the time I was gone out and back, school had already started, and it was too late to do that, so I ended up going to work for IBM for a few years, and then ultimately left when my time at IBM. After a couple of years, I had an opportunity to go in the insurance business, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So, but as far as the process goes, I guess I don't remember
It was
now.
probably a very happy day.
It was happy, but on the other hand, it was still a change. You know, you're used to your 2 years. You were used to, you know, get up every morning, go to the mess hall, fall out, you know, to report, and so on and so forth. Well, that ended real quick, so it was a little bit of a transition, and you know, coming back and finding a place to live and finding a job and so on.
Did they provide you transportation means to get back to the East Coast?
No, I drove back because we had driven out to the West Coast, but they paid us for, you know, gave us an allocation from California to our base of entry, which was like New York, you know, where we first went into the service in New York. So they paid us whatever, I don't remember what it was now.
And have you ever been a part of any military organizations or anything? And
No. Well, at that point, you know, we were in the reserve for 10 years, so I really didn't get my final discharge until that period of time was over, because I was still in the inactive reserve, not going to meetings and so on, but I was eligible to be called up, I guess, at some point in time. But no, I haven't really, and I'm not really sure why, but I just hadn't been connected with like the Legion or the VFW, or for whatever reason. I guess I just got into kind of other organizations, and having a large family, my time was kind of committed. So.
Yeah. Okay, so we thank you very much for serving our country and for doing this interview.
I hope it was helpful in some way or other.